The first time Evelyn Hart died, no one called it murder. The newspapers called it a tragic accident. Her colleagues called it exhaustion. The man she had loved for 7 years called it fate. Only Evelyn knew the truth. As the world around her dissolved into darkness, the image burned into her fading mind wasn't the laboratory explosion that had swallowed her whole. It was Adrian Cole walking away from the emergency ward. He hadn't even looked back. Hours earlier, she had received the final results of a treatment that could repair damaged nerve tissue, a discovery that could change millions of lives. She had called Adrian first. "I finally did it," she had whispered through tears. His answer had been strangely flat. "I'm busy today. We'll celebrate later." Later never came. Instead, someone tampered with the pressure valves inside Lab 4. The explosion erased years of research. It almost erased her. Lying beneath twisted steel, unable to move, Evelyn heard unfamiliar voices. The files. Destroyed. The formula? Only Hart knew the final adjustment. A pause. Then she's no longer useful. Footsteps faded. Someone had wanted her work erased. Someone had known exactly what she had discovered. Her last heartbeat echoed like distant thunder. Then, silence. A shrill alarm pierced the darkness. Evelyn's eyes snapped open. Bright morning sunlight poured through cream-colored curtains. The scent of fresh coffee drifted into the room. She sat upright so quickly that her head spun. No burns. No broken ribs. No oxygen tubes. Her hands trembled as she stared at smooth, unscarred skin. What? She reached for the phone beside her bed. March 8th. 5 years earlier. Exactly 1 week before she had first met Adrian Cole. Her breathing stopped. No. She opened the mirror. 27. Healthy. Alive. Not 32. Not dead. She leaned against the sink as memories crashed over her. Every award. Every betrayal. Every sleepless night. Every compromise she had made for love. She remembered abandoning her own research twice because Adrian's startup needed her expertise. She remembered declining a prestigious fellowship overseas because he wanted them to stay together. She remembered watching other scientists publish ideas she had discovered first because she had spent years helping his career instead of her own. And in the end, he hadn't even stayed beside her hospital bed. Tears gathered but never fell. Instead, something colder replaced them. Resolve. She whispered to her reflection. This time, I choose me. A notification buzzed on her phone. Congratulations. You have been shortlisted for the National Biomedical Innovation Fellowship. Interview begins in 3 days. In her first life, she had rejected the invitation without hesitation. Adrian had convinced her that long-distance relationships never survived. She smiled bitterly. This time, she accepted within 3 seconds. A second notification appeared. Professor Nathan Brooks. Evelyn, your paper on regenerative protein mapping impressed the committee. Don't waste this opportunity. She remembered him. The mentor she had ignored. The man who later won the Nobel Prize alongside another student after Evelyn disappeared into Adrian's shadow. Her fingers paused before typing. Thank you, Professor. I won't waste it again. She pressed send. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. That afternoon, she entered Westbridge Biomedical University. Students hurried across campus carrying stacks of journals. Everything looked painfully familiar. The fountain, the old oak tree, the chemistry building where she had once dreamed of changing medicine. She stopped outside Laboratory C. In her previous life, this was where Adrian had first bumped into her. Coffee spilled across her notes. He apologized with that charming smile. She laughed. Everything had started there. Evelyn glanced at the clock. 2 minutes. She knew exactly what would happen. Instead of entering the hallway, she turned around. She walked toward the research complex on the opposite side of campus. Behind her, someone called out, "Wait." She didn't stop. Footsteps hurried closer. "Excuse me." A man accidentally brushed past another student. Coffee splashed onto the ground. Not onto her. She kept walking, without ever seeing his face. Some meetings changed lives. Others destroyed them. She no longer believed destiny deserved blind trust. By evening, Professor Brooks personally welcomed her into his research team. You'll be working on neural regeneration. Evelyn almost laughed. Exactly where she belonged. He handed her a secure laboratory keycard. Very few people receive unrestricted access this early. I won't disappoint you. I know. His confidence surprised her. Nobody had believed in her so quickly during her first life. As she explored the laboratory, Every instrument reminded her of knowledge she hadn't yet discovered in this timeline. 5 years of future experience rested quietly inside her mind. She knew which experiments would fail, which proteins were unstable, which methods wasted years, which tiny adjustment eventually led to the breakthrough everyone thought impossible. She couldn't reveal everything immediately. People would never believe it. But she could walk toward the answer far faster than before. She rested one hand on a stainless steel workbench. This time, no shortcuts, no distractions, no sacrifices for someone else's dreams. Only science, only purpose, only lives waiting to be saved. Far across campus, a business student frowned while staring at a torn coffee-stained notebook. Adrian Cole looked around in confusion. Strange. I could have sworn someone was supposed to be here. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt as though he'd just missed something important, something that had quietly walked out of his future. Within a month, Evelyn's schedule had become almost mechanical. Arrive before sunrise, review published failures, run experiments, record every variable, leave only after the security lights switched on. Most researchers admired her discipline. A few whispered that she was obsessed. Neither opinion bothered her. Obsession had nearly killed her once. Now it became her greatest advantage. She wasn't racing against other scientists. She was racing against history. Every day she delayed was another day patients continued suffering from irreversible nerve damage. That thought kept her awake more effectively than coffee ever could. Professor Brooks began assigning graduate researchers to assist her. Most lasted less than 2 weeks. Not because Evelyn was cruel, because she expected precision. If the temperature changes by half a degree, she calmly explained to one assistant, the protein folds differently. Start over. But it's almost identical. Almost doesn't repair spinal injuries. The assistant sighed and reset the experiment. Professor Brooks watched quietly from the observation window. Another senior researcher chuckled. She's intimidating. Nathan smiled. No, she's focused. There is a difference. One rainy evening, Evelyn discovered something unexpected. Not inside a microscope. Inside an old storage archive. While searching for discontinued protein cultures, she found several dusty laboratory notebooks dating back nearly 15 years. One name appeared repeatedly. Dr. Iris Rowan. She had never heard of her. Curious, Evelyn opened the first notebook. The handwriting was elegant. The ideas, years ahead of their time. Neural scaffolding, cellular communication pathways, protein stabilization theories. Several concepts mirrored discoveries that would not become mainstream until years after Evelyn's first life. Why had nobody cited this woman? She checked the university database. Nothing. No awards. No retirement announcement. Just one line. Research discontinued after funding withdrawal. Evelyn frowned. That made no sense. Someone brilliant had simply vanished. She quietly borrowed copies of the notes. Something about them felt important. She couldn't explain why. 3 days later, the university hosted its annual biomedical networking gala. In her first life, this was where Adrian officially introduced himself. She hadn't intended to attend then. Neither did she now. Professor Brooks insisted. Research isn't only conducted in laboratories. It's also built through alliances. So she wore a simple navy dress instead of her usual lab coat. The ballroom buzzed with investors, professors, and medical entrepreneurs. Evelyn accepted sparkling water and remained near an exhibition displaying experimental prosthetic technology. Exactly 30 minutes later, a familiar voice drifted across the room, expanding into biomedical devices. She froze, not because she wanted to see him, because memory recognized him before her eyes did. Adrian Cole, still confident, still charming, still surrounded by people eager to listen. He hadn't changed. She had. He noticed her almost instantly. Their eyes met briefly. Confusion crossed his face. He smiled politely. I don't think we've met. In her previous life, those exact words had made her blush. Now, she simply nodded. We haven't. Then she returned her attention to the display. Adrian hesitated. Most conversations with strangers followed predictable patterns. This one ended before it even began. Oddly, that bothered him. I've heard you're Professor Brooks' newest researcher. Evelyn looked at him. Yes. I'm Adrian. I know. You know? Your presentation earlier was well prepared. Nothing more. Nothing less. She walked away before he could continue. Adrian watched her disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, someone had shown absolutely no interest in impressing him. Instead of relief, he felt curiosity, dangerous curiosity. Later that evening, Evelyn stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. Rain clouds rolled across the skyline. She closed her eyes. The cool wind carried away the noise inside the ballroom. "You escaped too?" She turned. Professor Brooks stood beside her with 2 cups of tea. He handed her one. She accepted. "You dislike parties. So do you?" He laughed. "Fair." After a long silence, he asked softly, "What drives you?" Most young researchers answered with ambition, recognition, money, prestige. Evelyn stared toward the distant hospital glowing across town. "I don't want another family to hear there's nothing medicine can do." Nathan studied her expression. "You speak like someone who's already witnessed that." For one terrifying second, she thought she had revealed too much. Instead, she smiled faintly. "I've read enough patient histories." He nodded, but deep inside, he wasn't convinced. There was an unusual weight behind her words, a grief no 27-year-old should carry. That same night, someone broke into Laboratory C. The intruder ignored expensive equipment, ignored computers, ignored chemical supplies. Instead, they searched one cabinet, the cabinet containing Dr. Iris Rowan's archived notebooks. Finding it empty, the figure whispered a curse, then vanished into the darkness before campus security arrived. The next morning, Evelyn unlocked her office door. Nothing appeared stolen, yet something felt wrong. A drawer she always kept perfectly aligned sat half an inch open. Someone had been here. She slowly looked toward the locked cabinet where Iris Rowan's copied notes were hidden. Still there, untouched. A chill crawled down her spine. She wasn't the only person interested in forgotten research anymore. And somewhere beyond the university walls, someone else had just realized that history was beginning to change. The security office dismissed the break-in as a failed theft. There are no missing computers, no damaged equipment, probably a student prank. Evelyn said nothing. She had spent enough years in research to know one truth. People who wanted knowledge rarely stole laptops. They stole notebooks, ideas, patterns. The copied journals of Dr. Iris Rowan remained hidden inside a locked drawer in Evelyn's apartment rather than the university. She no longer trusted coincidence. 2 weeks later, Professor Brooks summoned his research team. The conference room buzzed with quiet anticipation. On the screen behind him appeared one sentence. National Translational Medicine Initiative. The government, Brooks announced, will fund only 3 laboratories nationwide for advanced regenerative medicine. A murmur spread through the room. The grant was enormous. It meant unlimited equipment, clinical partnerships, years of financial security. More importantly, it meant the chance to move discoveries from laboratory benches to hospital beds. Brooks looked directly at Evelyn. "We're submitting a proposal." She nodded. In her previous life, Brooks' laboratory had lost the competition by a narrow margin. The winning proposal came from a private biomedical corporation. Ironically, it was Adrian Cole's company. She remembered the celebration headlines. She also remembered something no newspaper ever reported. Within 2 years, the corporation quietly abandoned the project after prioritizing profits over patients. Hundreds of millions had disappeared. Thousands of hopeful families were left waiting. This time, that future would never happen. For the next month, the laboratory became a battlefield. Researchers slept in offices. Coffee replaced proper meals. Every experiment had to produce undeniable evidence. One evening, Brooks studied Evelyn's latest results. "This stabilization rate," he adjusted his glasses, "is impossible. It shouldn't work." "It didn't," Evelyn answered carefully, "until I changed the binding sequence." He leaned closer. "How did you think of this?" She paused. She couldn't answer honestly, because she already knew. Instead, she smiled. "I stopped asking why the protein failed. I asked what it was trying to become." Professor Brooks remained silent. Then he laughed softly. Sometimes the simplest questions change everything. Across the city, Adrian Cole celebrated another successful investment meeting. His medical technology startup was growing quickly. Investors admired his confidence, his business instincts, his ability to predict market trends. Yet lately, something irritated him. A name kept appearing. Evelyn Hart. Research conference. University publication. Scientific journal. Innovation award nomination. Everywhere. His assistant entered his office. Sir, Westbridge University released another paper. Adrian barely looked up. Summarize it. The lead researcher is Evelyn Hart. He finally lifted his eyes. Again, the assistant continued. Industry experts believe Professor Brooks' laboratory may become the strongest candidate for the national initiative. Adrian frowned. Interesting. Very interesting. He had spoken with government advisors months earlier. Everyone expected private companies to dominate. How had one university laboratory suddenly become such serious competition? He opened Evelyn's latest publication. By the second page, he stopped reading. Not because it was boring, because it was brilliant, elegant, efficient, almost unsettling. He whispered, "Who are you?" Meanwhile, Evelyn's investigation into Dr. Iris Rowan continued. Every archived record ended the same way. Funding withdrawn. Project terminated. Personnel reassigned. Yet there was one inconsistency. Several financial documents had been sealed. Why seal funding records from 15 years ago? She visited the university archives again. The elderly archivist hesitated. Those files require special authorization. From whom? The university board. Why? He lowered his voice. I've worked here 30 years. I've never been told. Only that no one is allowed to access them. That answer only deepened the mystery. 3 days later, Evelyn received an unexpected email. Invitation to present research at the International Biomedical Summit. Location: Geneva. She stared at the screen. This conference hadn't invited her during her first life. Because she hadn't published enough. Because she'd been helping Adrian prepare investor presentations instead of finishing her own papers. History had already begun diverging. Professor Brooks grinned after reading the invitation. Except, I still have experiments. They'll survive 1 week. The opportunity may not. She laughed. You're impossible. So I've been told. Geneva welcomed her with cold mountain air and brilliant blue skies. The summit gathered scientists from over 40 countries. For the first time, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar. Freedom. No one introduced her as someone's girlfriend. No one assumed she was assisting another researcher. People came specifically to hear her speak. Her presentation lasted 30 minutes. Questions continued for another hour. When the audience finally applauded, she realized they weren't applauding potential. They were applauding achievement. As she packed her laptop afterward, an elderly neurologist approached. I've waited 20 years to hear someone challenge conventional thinking. He extended his hand. Thank you. The simple words affected her more than any award ever had. This was why she had chosen the laboratory. Not fame, not recognition. Hope. That evening, while returning to her hotel, Evelyn noticed the same gray sedan behind her for the third time. She changed streets. It followed. She entered a bookstore. 10 minutes later, the sedan remained outside. Her heartbeat slowed instead of accelerating. Fear solved nothing. Observation did. She memorized the license plate. When she exited through the rear entrance, the sedan finally drove away. Someone had been watching her. The question was, why? Back in her hotel room, she opened Dr. Iris Rowan's copied journal once more. Between 2 pages, something slipped onto the floor. A folded photograph. She frowned. She had never noticed it before. The picture showed 4 smiling researchers standing inside an old laboratory. Professor Brooks, a young Iris Rowan, 2 unfamiliar scientists. On the back, someone had written by hand. Truth survives only if someone remembers. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the photograph. This wasn't just old research anymore. Someone had wanted these people forgotten. The summit concluded with a formal banquet overlooking Lake Geneva. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Scientists discussed discoveries. Executives discussed investments. Politicians discussed influence. Evelyn preferred the balcony. Fresh air helped her think. She had barely stepped outside when a familiar voice interrupted the quiet. I knew I'd find you avoiding crowds. She turned. Adrian Cole. Perfectly tailored suit. Confident smile. Exactly as she remembered. Only this time, he wasn't the center of her world. He was simply another man standing in the cold. You came to Geneva. It seemed worth attending. His gaze lingered on her conference badge. I watched your presentation. She remained silent. It was impressive. Thank you. Nothing more. No nervous smile. No attempt to continue the conversation. Adrian found himself strangely disappointed. You've become difficult to read. I wasn't aware you ever could. The answer landed gently, but it struck harder than an insult. For a moment, Adrian simply looked at her. Something about this woman felt oddly familiar. Not her face, her presence. As if he'd somehow lost something he couldn't remember having. I have a proposal. Evelyn nearly laughed. Of course he did. You should hear it before refusing. I haven't refused. Yet. He smiled. My company is expanding into regenerative medicine. I'd like to fund your research. There it was. Business. Not admiration. Not friendship. Opportunity. In her first life, she would have accepted immediately. She would have believed shared dreams created lasting relationships. Now, she recognized leverage when she heard it. My research belongs to Professor Brooks' laboratory. We can offer better facilities. I'm already where I need to be. Think about your future. I am. And that's exactly why my answer is no. She walked away before he could reply. Behind her, Adrian remained standing beneath the balcony lights. For the first time in years, someone had rejected an offer he genuinely believed impossible to refuse. Oddly enough, it made him want to understand her even more. When Evelyn returned home 3 days later, campus life resumed immediately. But something had changed. The atmosphere felt heavier. Graduate students whispered in hallways. Faculty members avoided eye contact. Professor Brooks called an emergency meeting. His expression was unusually grim. The National Translational Medicine Initiative has requested independent verification of our data. A researcher frowned. That's standard. Brooks nodded slowly. Usually, this verification was requested anonymously. Silence filled the room. Someone had challenged the credibility of their work. Without evidence. Without explanation. Evelyn understood immediately. Someone wanted to delay them. Every delay benefited competing organizations, including Adrian's rapidly expanding company. But her instincts told her something else. This felt older, more calculated, as if invisible hands had manipulated research long before Adrian entered the industry. That afternoon, Evelyn reviewed laboratory access logs. One entry caught her attention. The night of the break-in, a master authorization card had opened the archive room. Only 5 people possessed such access. Professor Brooks, the university president, head of security, facilities director, and someone listed only as board executive authorization. No name, just a title. She copied the record before it mysteriously disappeared from the system an hour later. Someone was cleaning digital evidence. Too late. She already had it. That evening, Professor Brooks knocked on her office door. You've been distracted. She hesitated, then handed him the old photograph. His face changed instantly. Color drained from it. Where did you find this? Inside Dr. Rowan's notebook. He stared at Iris Rowan's smiling face for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, I thought every copy had been destroyed. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Destroyed by whom? Brooks looked toward the closed office blinds, then quietly locked the door. When he turned back, he looked older than she had ever seen him. There are things about this university that were buried before you arrived. He placed the photograph carefully on the desk. And if someone is searching for Iris Rowan's work again, then the past has finally come back. Outside the office window, evening shadows stretched across the empty campus. Neither of them noticed the tiny camera hidden inside the hallway smoke detector. A red recording light blinked once, then disappeared into darkness. Professor Brooks did not speak again until he had unplugged the office phone. Then he powered off both his laptop and Evelyn's. Finally, he drew the curtains completely shut. Evelyn had never seen him so cautious. Professor, he interrupted gently. From this moment on, if anyone asks, we never had this conversation. She nodded. Brooks placed the old photograph on the desk. 15 years earlier, the 4 smiling researchers had believed they were about to change medicine forever. Iris Rowan wasn't simply another scientist, he said quietly. She was the brightest researcher I've ever met. Evelyn looked at the picture again. Then why did she disappear? Brooks took a long breath. Because she refused to sell her discovery. 15 years ago, regenerative medicine was still considered too risky for major investment. Drug companies wanted treatments that patients would need repeatedly. Iris wanted something different. She dreamed of permanent healing. If we cure people, Iris often said, they won't need us anymore. To her, that was the highest compliment medicine could receive. Not everyone agreed. Several pharmaceutical investors quietly approached the university. They offered funding, state-of-the-art facilities, international partnerships. In exchange, they wanted exclusive ownership of every future patent. Iris refused. So did Brooks. Within months, funding vanished. Projects were canceled. Research teams were separated. Then one winter evening, Iris Rowan disappeared. No farewell. No resignation. No body. Officially, she had chosen to leave science. Professor Brooks had never believed it. Neither did Evelyn. Did anyone investigate? Brooks laughed bitterly. Of course. But powerful people know how to erase footprints. What about her family? No husband. No children. Only an elderly mother who passed away a few years later. The office fell silent. Evelyn slowly opened Iris's notebook. One sentence suddenly carried a very different meaning. Truth survives only if someone remembers. Iris had known. She had expected to be erased. Before either of them could continue, someone knocked. 3 sharp taps. Professor Brooks immediately hid the photograph inside a folder. Come in. The laboratory administrator entered. Professor, representatives from the National Initiative have arrived early. Brooks smiled politely. We'll meet them shortly. As soon as the door closed again, he whispered. Not another word. Evelyn understood. Some conversations belonged only to locked rooms. The inspection team spent 2 days inside the laboratory. Every notebook was examined. Every experiment repeated. Every chemical inventory counted. One inspector remained especially interested in Evelyn. You designed this protocol yourself? Yes. Without outside consultation? Yes. Remarkable. His smile never reached his eyes. When he finally left, Evelyn noticed him speaking privately with a man wearing an expensive charcoal suit. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she recognized the company logo. Cole Biomedical. Adrian's company. That evening Adrian requested a meeting. She almost declined. Instead, curiosity won. They met at a quiet cafe near the university. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Adrian placed a folder on the table. I'll keep this brief. I appreciate that. He slid the folder toward her. Inside were architectural designs, a cutting-edge research center, private laboratories, clinical testing facilities, unlimited equipment. My investors approved construction. He looked directly at her. I want you to lead it. Evelyn closed the folder without reading another page. No, you haven't even. My answer won't change. He frowned. You've devoted your life to research. I'm offering everything you need. No. What exactly is Professor Brooks giving you that I can't? She answered without hesitation. Trust. The single word silenced him. Money built laboratories. Trust built discoveries. Adrian looked genuinely confused. I'm not your enemy. No. She stood. But you're not my destination either. She left before he could respond. Adrian remained alone, staring at the untouched folder. For reasons he couldn't explain, her rejection hurt far more than losing any investor ever had. 2 mornings later, disaster struck. Laboratory freezer number 6 malfunctioned overnight. Months of experimental protein cultures had thawed. Several unique samples were ruined forever. Graduate researchers rushed through the laboratory in panic. Professor Brooks immediately ordered a technical investigation. The maintenance report arrived before noon. Electrical failure. Accidental. Evelyn wasn't convinced. She checked temperature records herself. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the freezer had been manually switched off. Not broken. Switched off. Someone inside the building had done it. She quietly compared security logs. One access card appeared twice. A temporary maintenance badge, issued only 3 days earlier. The employee's name didn't exist in the university database anymore. Deleted. Just like the digital access record after the archive break-in. Someone wasn't merely sabotaging research. Someone controlled information afterward. That required influence far beyond an ordinary thief. Late that night, Evelyn returned alone to the laboratory. Most lights were off. Only emergency lamps illuminated the corridors. She entered the damaged storage room. Everything appeared untouched. Yet something glittered beneath a metal cabinet. She crouched. A tiny silver pin, no larger than her thumbnail, engraved with one symbol, a phoenix rising from a circle. She had never seen the emblem before. Carefully wrapping it in tissue, she slipped it into her pocket. Somewhere, someone had just left their first real clue. The following afternoon, Evelyn visited the City Museum's historical archives. Not for art, for symbols. The elderly curator adjusted his glasses as she showed him the silver pin. I've seen this before. Her pulse quickened. Where? He disappeared into a storage room. Minutes later, He returned carrying an old exhibition catalog. He turned to a faded black-and-white photograph. A fundraising gala. 30 years earlier. Among dozens of wealthy donors stood several influential industrialists. Each wore the same phoenix emblem on their lapel. What organization was this? The curator shrugged. It no longer exists. Officially. What do you mean? It changed names many times. Private foundations. Medical charities. Investment consortiums. The people changed. The influence remained. He lowered his voice. They preferred working behind the scenes. Evelyn photographed the page. Another thread. Another mystery. Back at the university, Professor Brooks studied the image in silence. I was afraid of this. You recognize it? Not the people. The symbol. He looked exhausted. When Iris disappeared, I found the same emblem outside her laboratory. A cold silence settled between them. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Someone connected Iris's disappearance, the recent sabotage, and today's investigation. Meanwhile, Cole Biomedical held its quarterly board meeting. Adrian presented expansion plans confidently. Projected profits climbed steadily. Investors applauded. Then the chairman interrupted. We've received reports about Professor Brooks' laboratory. Adrian nodded. They're becoming strong competitors. Handle it. I intend to compete fairly. The chairman smiled thinly. Fairness is expensive. Adrian's expression hardened. I built this company without destroying other people's work. And we'd like to keep it that way. The room became strangely quiet. One elderly board member slowly rotated a silver ring around his finger. A phoenix was engraved upon it. Adrian noticed. Something about the symbol stirred a vague memory. Had he seen it before? The chairman spoke again. Leave university politics to us. Politics? Adrian frowned. Since when had scientific competition become politics? That night, he couldn't sleep. Evelyn's words echoed endlessly. Trust. He opened every file he possessed regarding Professor Brooks' laboratory. Most documents focused on scientific progress. One confidential report caught his attention. Prepared years before he joined the company. Subject: Dr. Iris Rowan. His heartbeat quickened. Why was a 15-year-old missing scientist stored in company archives? He opened the file. Half the pages had been removed. The remaining page contained only one handwritten instruction. Archive permanently. Nothing else. Someone had erased the truth long before Adrian ever became CEO. Across town, Evelyn worked late again. She carefully compared Iris's notebooks with her own research. At first glance, the experiments differed. Then she noticed something. Iris had stopped just short of the breakthrough Evelyn already remembered from her first life. Just one final molecular adjustment. One tiny correction. If Iris had completed it, she would have changed medicine 15 years earlier. Unless someone had stopped her first. Evelyn slowly closed the notebook. A realization settled heavily upon her. Her future breakthrough wasn't entirely hers. She wasn't inventing the cure from nothing. She was unknowingly finishing the work of a woman history had erased. She whispered into the silent laboratory. I won't let them erase you again. Outside the laboratory window, a black sedan remained parked across the street. Its engine idled quietly. Inside, a man raised binoculars toward Evelyn's office light. He spoke into a secure phone. She's found Rowan's trail. A calm voice answered. Then proceed to phase 2. The call ended. The sedan drove away into the darkness. Evelyn never saw it. But for the first time since beginning her second life, the danger was no longer waiting in the future. It had arrived in the present. The first threat arrived without a signature. Evelyn found it slipped beneath the door of her apartment when she returned from the laboratory after midnight. No envelope, just a single sheet of white paper. Across the center, one sentence had been typed in plain black letters. Some discoveries should remain buried. Nothing else. No fingerprints. No logo. No name. She read it once. Then a second time. Instead of panic, she reached for a plastic evidence sleeve she kept for laboratory samples. She sealed the paper inside. If someone wanted to frighten her, they had already failed. But if someone had touched that paper, they had left traces. The next morning, she quietly handed it to Professor Brooks. He didn't look surprised. I received one like this. When, 16 years ago, her eyes widened. Before Iris disappeared? He nodded. I threw it away. A shadow crossed his face. I've regretted that decision ever since. This time, Evelyn would not make the same mistake. Every clue mattered. Every mistake from the first timeline had taught her that. 3 days later, the National Translational Medicine Initiative announced the finalists. Researchers crowded into the university auditorium as the live broadcast began. And the 3 selected institutions are. The first 2 names appeared. Then, Westbridge Biomedical University. The auditorium erupted. Students cheered. Researchers embraced one another. Professor Brooks closed his eyes for a long second before smiling. We did it. Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction. History had changed. In her first life, Brooks had lost this opportunity. Now, the laboratory finally had the funding it deserved. Across the city, however, the mood inside Cole Biomedical was very different. The boardroom fell silent as the announcement ended. One executive slammed a folder onto the table. A university beat us. Another turned toward Adrian. You assured us their proposal wouldn't survive review. Adrian remained calm. I said we'd compete. I never promised victory. The chairman's expression darkened. Competition is a luxury. We expected results. For the first time since becoming CEO, Adrian realized something unsettling. The board seemed less disappointed about losing funding, and more angry that Professor Brooks' laboratory had won. Why? Construction of the new government-funded research center began immediately. State-of-the-art equipment arrived almost daily. Advanced imaging systems, automated sequencing platforms, cryogenic storage units. It was every scientist's dream. Professor Brooks gathered the team. This funding comes with responsibility. We are no longer conducting academic research alone. We're carrying the hopes of patients. Everyone nodded. No one understood that more deeply than Evelyn. She had already lived through the future where those hopes were crushed. She would not allow history to repeat itself. Weeks later, while reviewing Iris Rowan's notebooks for perhaps the 100th time, Evelyn noticed something she had overlooked. The page numbers. One sequence jumped unexpectedly. Page 214. Then page 219. 5 pages were missing. Not torn accidentally. Removed carefully with a blade. Someone had extracted them long ago. She examined the notebook under ultraviolet light. Faint pressure marks remained on the next page. She adjusted the angle. Letters slowly emerged. Not complete. Just fragments. North. Locker. Station. September. A hidden message. Iris had left directions. After hours of careful reconstruction, Evelyn finally identified the location. North Station. Locker 117. She checked historical records. The station had been renovated years earlier. Most original lockers no longer existed. But not all. Some remained sealed beneath the old platform. She waited until Saturday morning, then traveled there alone. The abandoned underground corridor smelled of dust and rust. Most passengers never noticed it. A maintenance worker glanced at her visitor's permit and unlocked the gate. You've got 30 minutes. She thanked him and descended. Rows of forgotten lockers lined the wall. Most were broken. Some had been welded shut. Then she found it. Her heartbeat quickened. The lock had long since rusted away. Inside sat a small, weathered metal box. Nothing more. With careful hands, she lifted it free. Inside, a cassette tape, 3 handwritten notebooks, a tiny brass key, and 1 sealed letter. The handwriting matched Iris Rowan's. It was addressed simply, to whoever refuses to forget. Evelyn didn't open the letter at the station. She waited until she returned to Professor Brooks' office. He stared at the familiar handwriting for several seconds before speaking. I never thought. His voice broke. I'd see this again. Evelyn carefully opened the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, but the ink remained clear. She began reading aloud. If you're reading this, then I failed to protect my work. That means the people following me were stronger than I expected. Do not trust anyone who speaks only about markets while pretending to care about patients. They believe illness is more profitable than recovery. Professor Brooks closed his eyes. It sounded exactly like Iris. The letter continued. I discovered something unexpected during our regeneration trials. The treatment worked. Evelyn's breathing stopped. Worked? 15 years ago? Not perfectly. Not safely enough for patients. But enough to prove healing is possible. Someone offered me a fortune to surrender everything. When I refused, the next sentence had been smeared by water damage. Only a few words remained visible. They, watching everywhere. Evelyn carefully turned the page. If they erase me, they must never erase the cure. The missing research isn't in these notebooks. It's hidden where only one person would think to look. There was no location. Only one final line. Nathan, if you survived, I'm sorry. Professor Brooks lowered his head. For the first time since Evelyn had met him, she saw tears. The cassette tape proved even more astonishing. Old equipment was difficult to find, but the university archives still had a functioning player. Brooks inserted the tape. Static filled the room. Then a woman's calm voice emerged. Today is September 18th. My name is Iris Rowan. If this recording still exists, then someone tried to silence me. Her voice remained steady despite the fear beneath it. She described repeated surveillance, unknown visitors, funding pressure, anonymous threats. Then she said something neither of them expected. I made one mistake. I trusted someone inside the university. The recording clicked briefly. I don't know who betrayed me, but they knew every step I took. The tape ended abruptly. No farewell, no explanation, just silence. Someone had stopped the recording, or stopped Iris herself. Before they could discuss it further, alarms echoed through the research building. Red emergency lights flashed across the hallways. Graduate students hurried outside. Smoke drifted from the lower laboratory floor. Professor Brooks and Evelyn rushed downstairs. Laboratory 7 had caught fire. Sprinklers poured water across expensive equipment. Firefighters arrived within minutes. Fortunately, no one had been injured, but the timing felt impossible. Too convenient. Once the flames were extinguished, investigators reported the cause. Electrical malfunction. Evelyn knelt near the damaged control panel. Among the soaked debris, she spotted something metallic. A partially melted silver phoenix pin. The same emblem. Again, someone hadn't merely been threatening them anymore. They were destroying evidence. Destroying laboratories. Destroying history. Across the street, hidden inside a parked car, an older man watched firefighters surround the building. He removed his glasses and quietly spoke into a phone. She found Rowan's message. The voice on the other end remained calm. And Brooks. He's remembering too much. A brief pause followed. Then came the order. Separate them. The call ended. The car disappeared into traffic before anyone noticed it had ever been there. Back inside the smoke-damaged laboratory, Evelyn looked at the blackened phoenix pin resting in her gloved hand. She finally understood one terrifying truth. The people hunting Iris Rowan had never stopped. They had simply been waiting for someone else to finish her work. The morning after the fire, the laboratory smelled of smoke and disinfectant. Broken glass had been cleared away. Burned equipment had been removed. But the damage lingered in every corner. Researchers worked in near silence. No one believed the official report anymore. Electrical malfunction. It was becoming the convenient explanation for everything. Professor Brooks gathered the senior team. We continue. One researcher looked stunned. Continue. They've already sabotaged us twice. They've threatened Dr. Hart. They burned a laboratory. Brooks answered calmly. Then we've become important enough to frighten someone. No one argued after that. Evelyn spent the afternoon reviewing every page of Iris Rowan's journals again. One sentence kept returning to her mind. The missing research isn't in these notebooks. Where had Iris hidden it? She listed every clue. North Station. Locker 117. The brass key. The unfinished letter. The cassette. Nothing pointed to a location. Unless the key itself wasn't for the station. It was for somewhere else. She examined it under a microscope. Tiny engraved letters circled the base. WBM, LA 12. Westbridge Biomedical. Laboratory Annex 12. She froze. The annex had been demolished nearly 12 years earlier. Or had it? University blueprints revealed something interesting. The annex building had indeed been torn down, but its underground storage basement had never been filled. It remained sealed beneath the new research complex. Professor Brooks stared at the map. I haven't been down there since Iris disappeared. Then let's change that. Late that evening, after obtaining emergency maintenance authorization, they descended beneath the modern building. Dust covered everything. Old pipes lined narrow concrete corridors. Most rooms had collapsed. Finally, they reached a rusted steel door. The brass key fit perfectly. The lock clicked. Inside stood a forgotten laboratory. Time seemed frozen. Old microscopes. Research benches. Chemical cabinets. Everything abandoned exactly as it had been 15 years earlier. Professor Brooks slowly walked through the room. Iris. His voice barely escaped his lips. On one wall hung a faded whiteboard. Half-erased equations still covered its surface. Evelyn immediately recognized them, not because she had seen them before, because they matched calculations from her own research. Separated by 15 years, they had arrived at the same destination. She opened a cabinet. Inside sat dozens of sealed specimen tubes. Most labels had faded. One remained readable. Prototype R9. Professor Brooks' eyes widened. This was her final series. The samples had survived. Cold underground temperatures had preserved them. Carefully, Evelyn transferred everything into protective containers. Then she noticed something taped beneath the cabinet shelf. Another envelope. Smaller. Inside rested a single page. No greeting. Only one sentence. The cure is never complete until it reaches ordinary people. Evelyn quietly folded the page. That sentence became more valuable than any scientific formula. As they prepared to leave, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Neither of them had expected anyone else. The lights outside suddenly went dark. Professor Brooks whispered, "Stay behind me." A flashlight beam swept across the doorway. Then another. Voices. "Search every room." They came here. Someone else knew about the hidden laboratory. Evelyn switched off her own flashlight. The room fell into darkness. She could hear 3 people moving closer. Metal scraped against concrete. Someone tested the locked door. It was opened recently. Another voice answered. They can't have gone far. Professor Brooks quietly pointed toward a ventilation passage behind old storage shelves. Barely wide enough for one person. There was no time to argue. One after another, they crawled inside. Seconds later, the laboratory door burst open. Flashlights flooded the empty room. Holding her breath inside the narrow passage, Evelyn listened carefully. One intruder cursed. They took the samples. Another replied, "Then destroy everything else." A loud crash echoed through the laboratory. Glass shattered. Cabinets overturned. Equipment smashed. The hidden laboratory where Iris had worked for years was being erased. Again, history repeating itself. Except this time, someone had escaped with the truth. Nearly 40 minutes later, after the intruders finally left, Evelyn and Brooks emerged. The room had been devastated. Every remaining notebook, every instrument, every photograph, destroyed. Professor Brooks slowly picked up a broken microscope. "They've spent 15 years trying to erase her." Evelyn answered quietly. "They're too late." She lifted the secured container holding prototype R9. "We remembered." News of the break-in never reached the newspapers. University officials declared the underground laboratory structurally unsafe and sealed it permanently. Someone was already controlling the narrative. But this time, Evelyn possessed evidence they couldn't erase. Prototype R9. Iris's preserved samples. The cassette recording. The letters. The Phoenix pin. And the most important evidence of all, knowledge. Over the next 3 months, Evelyn's team carefully analyzed prototype R9. The results shocked everyone. Iris's approach had solved problems modern researchers still struggled with. She had been years ahead of her generation. Yet one flaw remained. The treatment caused severe immune reactions, fatal in long-term testing. Professor Brooks looked disappointed. So close. Evelyn smiled faintly. Not close. Closer. Because she already knew the final adjustment. She had discovered it during her first life. Now, she finally understood why her work had succeeded where Iris's had stopped. Their discoveries completed each other. Neither woman alone had possessed the full answer. Across 2 generations, the cure had quietly assembled itself. For 6 relentless weeks, the laboratory operated almost continuously. Researchers rotated in shifts. No one complained. They all sensed history unfolding. Finally, at 2:17 a.m. on a cold November morning, the latest test results appeared. Cell regeneration remained stable. Immune response normalized. Neural communication restored. No abnormal toxicity. Silence filled the laboratory. No one dared speak first. Professor Brooks checked every graph again. Then again. Finally, he looked toward Evelyn. His eyes glistened. "It works." She stared at the monitor. After living 2 lives, after losing everything once, after following Iris Rowan's forgotten footsteps, the impossible had become real. Not perfect, not finished, but undeniably real. A cure had been born. The announcement transformed the scientific world overnight. Medical journals called it revolutionary. Hospitals requested collaboration. Governments offered funding. Patients' organizations flooded the university with letters. One mother wrote, My son has waited 9 years to move his hands again. Evelyn read every letter. They reminded her why she had refused easier choices, why she had chosen the laboratory over love. The success also created enemies. Cole Biomedical's board held another emergency meeting. The chairman slammed the latest journal onto the table. They've done it. Several directors looked uneasy. If clinical trials succeed, our entire long-term treatment strategy changes. Adrian stared at them. That's the point. The room became silent. One director leaned forward. You seem pleased. I am. We're talking about curing paralysis. Another executive replied coldly. We're talking about destroying billion-dollar treatment markets. Adrian slowly looked around the room. For the first time, he understood. These people had never truly wanted a cure. They wanted dependence. Suddenly, Iris Rowan's missing file, the anonymous investigations, the sabotage, everything began fitting together. He stood. I won't be part of this. The chairman's expression hardened. Sit down. Adrian didn't. Instead, he removed his company identification card and placed it on the table. I resign. Gasps filled the room. You built this company. I won't help destroy medicine to protect profits. Without another word, he walked out. Behind him, the chairman quietly spoke to another director. Then Mr. Cole has become inconvenient. That same evening, Evelyn prepared to leave the laboratory. The parking garage was nearly empty. She unlocked her car. A sudden voice stopped her. Don't drive. She turned sharply. Adrian stepped from the shadows. His face looked exhausted. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit anymore. Only a dark coat. I know who's behind this. Evelyn remained cautious. You should leave. I resign today. I don't care about your job. You should. He handed her a small encrypted flash drive. I copied everything before I left. Board communications, financial records, internal investigations, Iris Rowan, the Phoenix organization, and, he hesitated, a contract authorizing your surveillance. Evelyn's expression changed for the first time, not because she trusted him, because she believed the fear in his eyes. They're coming. Before she could answer, headlights suddenly flared at the garage entrance. 2 black SUVs accelerated inside. Adrian grabbed her wrist. Run! The engines roared toward them. The hunt was over. The confrontation had finally begun. The tires screamed across the concrete parking garage. 2 black SUVs accelerated directly toward them. Evelyn. Adrian pulled her behind a thick support pillar just as one vehicle swerved past. Metal crunched. Her abandoned car spun sideways after being struck. Glass exploded across the floor. The engine stopped. 4 men stepped out. None wore uniforms. None carried visible weapons. But every movement was disciplined. Professional. We don't have much time, Adrian said. There's an emergency stairwell. They ran. Footsteps echoed behind them. The pursuers never shouted. They simply followed. That frightened Evelyn more than anger would have. People like this didn't lose control. By the time they reached the roof, both exits had been blocked. One team below, another emerging from the opposite staircase. They were trapped. The oldest man among them stepped forward. Gray hair, perfectly tailored coat. A silver phoenix pin gleamed beneath his lapel. Dr. Hart. His voice was calm. We've admired your work. Evelyn answered evenly. You have an unusual way of showing admiration. A faint smile crossed his face. You've misunderstood our intentions. No, I finally understand them. He sighed. Cures are disruptive. They destroy industries. They destabilize economies. They eliminate carefully balanced systems. Evelyn stared at him. You're talking about human lives. I'm talking about civilization. Professor Brooks had once said that some people measured success in lives saved. Others measured it in money protected. Standing on that rooftop, she finally met the second kind. The man extended one hand. Give us prototype R9 and every copy of your finalized research. In return, you and Professor Brooks will live comfortably. And the cure, it will be postponed. Evelyn almost laughed. So people continue suffering? For stability. Her answer came without hesitation. No. The man's expression didn't change. I expected that. He nodded once. The men behind him moved forward. Before they reached her, police sirens erupted below. Dozens of them. Blue and red lights flooded the streets. Helicopter blades thundered overhead. The older man's eyes narrowed. He looked toward Adrian. You copied more than board documents. Adrian replied quietly. I copied everything. including every illegal payment, every hidden account, every destroyed research project, every surveillance order, every reference to Iris Rowan. The encrypted drive had automatically uploaded its contents to multiple investigative agencies the moment Adrian resigned. He had anticipated retaliation. The Phoenix members scattered. Some escaped. Others were arrested before leaving the building. The older man disappeared into the confusion. His final glance toward Evelyn held neither anger nor fear, only disappointment, as if he regretted losing an investment. 3 days later, the story dominated international headlines. Secret medical consortium, research suppression, financial manipulation, missing scientists. Government investigations expanded across several countries. Among the recovered records was one astonishing discovery. Iris Rowan had never voluntarily disappeared. She had been abducted while attempting to deliver evidence to federal investigators. Her death had been concealed. For 15 years, her name had quietly vanished from history. Until now, Professor Brooks stood silently inside the University Memorial Hall. Workers carefully unveiled a bronze plaque. Dr. Iris Rowan, scientist, teacher, visionary, whose courage changed medicine. Brooks rested one hand against the plaque. "I'm sorry it took us so long." Beside him, Evelyn placed Iris's original notebook beneath the memorial display. Students stopped to read it. For the first time, future generations would know her name. She had finally come home. Months later, the first human clinical trials began. Patients arrived from around the world, some in wheelchairs, some carried by family members. Many had already exhausted every available treatment. Evelyn refused to celebrate early. Hope demanded caution. Science demanded proof. Every participant was monitored relentlessly. Weeks passed. Then the first results arrived. A young father who had lost movement after a construction accident slowly lifted 2 fingers. His wife burst into tears. 3 weeks later, he moved his entire hand. Soon after, another patient stood with assistance. Then another. Not every case succeeded immediately, but enough did. Enough to prove that what had once seemed impossible could become ordinary, exactly as Iris had hoped. 1 year later, the World Congress of Medicine honored the research team. The auditorium overflowed with physicians, scientists, and patient advocates. Professor Brooks was invited to deliver the opening remarks. Instead, he stepped away from the podium. "This belongs to someone else." He gestured toward Evelyn. The audience rose in applause before she even reached the microphone. She waited until the room became quiet. Then she spoke. "When people ask who discovered this treatment, my name shouldn't be the only answer." A photograph appeared on the giant screen. Iris Rowan smiled back at thousands of strangers. Science isn't built by one person. It's a relay. Someone runs the first miles. Someone else carries the finish. I was fortunate enough to complete a race that another brilliant scientist began. The applause lasted several minutes. Somewhere, history itself seemed to breathe easier. After the ceremony, reporters crowded around Evelyn. One asked the question everyone expected. "Do you regret sacrificing your personal life for your career?" She smiled gently. "I never sacrificed love. I simply stopped confusing love with abandoning myself." The answer spread across newspapers worldwide. Outside the conference center, Adrian waited beneath a maple tree. He looked healthier than he had in years. After leaving Cole Biomedical, he had testified during every investigation. His evidence helped dismantle the remaining Phoenix network. Several executives received lengthy prison sentences. Others disappeared before they could be arrested. The organization itself collapsed. At least, the part they had uncovered. Evelyn approached him. "You've been waiting. I wasn't sure you'd come." She smiled faintly. "You helped expose the truth. I wanted to thank you." He nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. "In another life." He stopped himself and laughed softly. "Forget that." "No." Evelyn looked toward the autumn leaves drifting across the sidewalk. "I've learned wondering about different paths doesn't change the one we're walking." He understood. She wasn't speaking only about careers. She was speaking about them. "I love the person I used to be," Adrian admitted. "But I don't think he deserved you." She answered honestly. He didn't. There was no bitterness left in her voice. Only truth. He smiled. "I figured." Then he extended his hand. "Friends." She looked at it for a second before shaking it. "Friends. Nothing more. Nothing less." Sometimes forgiveness didn't mean beginning again. Sometimes it simply meant putting down a burden. Several weeks later, the university officially opened the Rowan Hart Center for Regenerative Medicine. Students filled the laboratories. Young researchers argued excitedly over impossible ideas. Patients visited not as hopeless cases, but as partners in discovery. Near the entrance stood 2 bronze statues, one of Iris Rowan, one of a young girl in a wheelchair reaching toward the future. There was no statue of Evelyn. She had politely refused. Instead, she requested another inscription. It was carved into the stone wall where every student would see it before entering. The purpose of science is not to be remembered. It is to make suffering forget us. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, Evelyn walked alone through the quiet laboratory. She stopped beside the first successful treatment sample. Its clear solution shimmered beneath the lights. In her first life, she had abandoned herself for someone else's dream. She had lost years, her love, her future, even her life. In this one, she chose the laboratory over love. Not because love had no value, but because real love, whether for another person, for humanity, or for one's calling, never demands that you disappear. She rested her hand against the glass. Somewhere beyond the laboratory walls, thousands of patients were beginning lives they had once believed impossible. A little boy took his first independent steps. A violinist played again after years of silence. A mother embraced her daughter without assistance. Those moments would never know Evelyn's name. They didn't need to. She smiled peacefully, because she already knew the cure. And this time, she had lived long enough to give it to the world. The end.